Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 892B, and today's date is February 12th, 2016, and the title of the episode is The Ceasefire Agreement is a Ruse to Launch the Next Plan in Syria. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, we have been talking about the Zika virus for a couple of days now since the governments, the World Health Organization, the CDC, has been pushing their agenda, and we're starting to realize that this whole thing is a complete hoax. It's a complete cover-up from Monsanto. And we are starting to realize that part of their agenda is, of course, to push vaccines. I mean, this was a cover-up, which is part of their agenda, and the other part is, let's get everyone scared. Let's scare them into accepting more vaccines. We can make the pharmaceutical companies a lot of money, and all we have to do is scare the people and tell them that they need a vaccine. And this is exactly what's happening right now. The World Health Organization is saying that, hey, they're only 18 months away from trials with this vaccine that they have magically. We're seeing in the United States, they're going to take their vaccine and they're going to use human trials within months. It's amazing how quickly all this came about. And they're going to use this down in South America to see how it works. And then, of course, what they're going to do is say, oh, we need it in the United States, we need it throughout Europe, and they'll try to push it to be mandatory. And all of this is a complete cover-up for the chemical they were using in Brazil to try to kill the mosquitoes. Because that, coming from a group of doctors down there, they are saying that is what correlates, and they ran tests. This is what has been causing the problem. But of course, they don't want you to know that. They have other agendas they're trying to push. Now, the U.S. is going to begin implementing biometric systems at the airports by 2018. Remember, they want everyone to have a real ID. It's going to include fingerprints, iris scan, maybe a DNA sample. It's going to have a barcode, an RFID chip in it. They've been giving states some more time to comply. Jay Johnson is out there saying, yes, the biometric exit system will begin to be implemented at airports across the United States by 2018. They're going to collect fingerprints for those people who leave the country, and you know what happens. Okay, that's not so bad. You can collect my fingerprints. I leave the country. You come back in. Soon, they're going to want more. Soon, it's going to be for domestic use, so they can match it up to the database and correlate everything to keep track of where you are. And we see this data can be, traded with other governments. And right now, what they're doing is they're creating an instance where everyone is going to be tracked wherever they go. When they come in and out of the country, they'll know exactly where you are at any given moment. Now, as we know, NATO, the U.S., they are moving troops, military assets, and surrounding Russia, containing them, just like they've done in the Pacific, where they're encircling China and they're containing China. Just like they're doing with North Korea right now with the new missiles that South Korea is purchasing. Those missiles will be pointing to North Korea and to China. We see the UK has brought in warships which are patrolling, and they are in the Black Sea. They're moving troops in, around 6,000 or so, to the Baltic countries. NATO right now is welcoming the announcement of U.S. plans to significantly increase presence in Europe. With what? More troops, heavy equipment, and it's all being brought in. Now the question is, why? Why do they need all this? What are they so worried about? Well, they're not worried about anything. They're getting prepared for war. That's what they're doing at this point. And we realize that Turkey released all these refugees, and they let them go throughout Europe. And all the European countries are saying this is ridiculous, there's too many, we can't handle it. And we know they have the Schengen, where they can go anywhere without a passport. The borders are open. And normally during war or prior to war, countries start to close down their borders. And we know the refugees were being used to get Europe involved in Syria. And when I say involved, I mean more money, more troops, more military assets, and get them very angry in what's going on in Syria. And right now, it looks like the European nations, from a document that was released, it says that they might, at this point, restrict passport-free travel by invoking an emergency rule for 2 years due to the migration crisis. So we know that Israel is building a fence around their country. Other countries now are going to throw away the Schengen. They're going to close their borders. They're going to erect fences all around, set up the borders once again. And we know that Turkey, along with Jay Johnson, who is helping Turkey do this along their border. So what does this all mean? It means they're getting prepared for something very big. And we all need to be worried about what is coming here, because all these indicators that we've been looking at is pointing in this direction. We see NATO has ships out in the Mediterranean. Of course, they're out there saying that, they're trying to help with pirating, with the refugee scenario, but we know they're bringing in more ships to the area to patrol the areas, to control the areas. And out in Iraq, we see that the Iraqi army has been taking back Ramadi, and they're finding the Islamic State trying to sneak out of the country. A lot of them are dressed as women as they try to flee from the Iraqi forces. And the whole thing is completely falling apart. And what we realize at this point is that NATO said something very interesting today. They said NATO has decided to provide assistance in the refugee crisis because it affects all of us, and we have to contribute to solve it. This is coming from Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, adding that the Russian raids has significantly contributed to the worsening refugee crisis. And he went on to say that NATO warships in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea are ready to defend the Turkish territory in the event of a new development that would threaten Turkey's safety and security. What new development? So the ships are there for what then? They're there for war, for this new development. They're letting you know already what is about to happen. Right now, U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter says NATO military alliance may join a coalition that will target, of course, the Islamic State. No. They're building up their coalition with war and to go after Russia. Because this is what it's about right now. They know they can't get Assad out of the country. They know that Russia will not let this happen. They know that the people in Syria, they're going to vote for Assad, just like they did back in July of 2014. So the plan has changed. The plan is, let's go start the war with Russia. This is why we're seeing the buildup of the ships. This is why the UK has ships there. This is why the US has brought amphibious ships to the Mediterranean. This is why they're having drills right now in Jordan. They're bringing in the military assets. Troops into Jordan. This is why Saudi Arabia keeps saying, yes, we will supply the armed forces to fight in Syria. they're planning something, and they're planning something big. Now, we see that the U.S. and Russia, they got together, and they created this ceasefire peace plan. It's an ambitious plan to end all the hostilities, and they might push this within the next week and revive the Geneva III peace talks. They want to begin delivering humanitarian aid to civilians and help out those people who are suffering, which is something they need to do. The main objective is to destroy the Islamic State. And Lavrov is out there saying, listen, I know we have a ceasefire, but this doesn't stop us from hitting terrorists. The problem I have with all this is that they never came up with a list of who the terrorist is and who the opposition is. So the U.S. could come out and say, listen, you're hitting the opposition. The Russia could say, no, we're not. We're hitting the terrorists, because it's unclear at this time. And the U.S. could come back and say, listen, they broke the ceasefire deal once again, which they never did in the first place. But these are the words they will use. The UN official is out there, and he is casting doubt on the outlook for the Syria peace talks. Because the United States does not want peace. The Islamic State is the proxy army for the United States government. Now, Britain is out there saying, listen, a deal to end fighting in Syria requires a change in behavior from the government of Assad. Really? So we have a leader that was elected by his people in July of 2014, or it was the end of June of 2014, got like 86-87% of the vote. He's trying to win back his country, invited Russia in, not the United States, not Britain, not Saudi Arabia, but Russia, to get rid of the terrorists in this country, which Russia is doing. The people are screaming and yelling, saying, yes, thank you for this. You liberated us. It was awful living under the proxy army of the United States government, the UK, Israel, and the other coalition forces. So, what are we seeing here right now? Well, we are seeing that this whole ceasefire is a complete ruse. Iraq is saying, listen, we're hearing rumors that Saudi Arabia is getting ready to invade Syria. Iraq is dead set against this. And we see why the United States needs some time here, because Russia destroyed the oil convoy, and they have also destroyed the CIA's arms smuggling operation in Syria. The closing of the Azaz corridor, a major supply artery of the moderate rebels in Syria, should be viewed as a crippling military defeat for the United States. Now, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry continually said, listen, Russia, please stop and open the corridor once again. We can't have this closed. Now, Russia has closed off many of the pathways for the CIA. And they've been stopping all of this around the area. And, of course, the U.S. doesn't like this. This is hurting their proxy army, their opposition forces. And we see this is a huge problem for them. So they're hoping that the ceasefire would stop all this. And, of course, they're allowed to bring in humanitarian aid. What do you think they're really bringing in? It's not going to be humanitarian aid to civilians. It's going to be a drop for the terrorist groups, the opposition, which is all one and the same. Now, Turkey is making the case of why they had to close their border. Because there's 100,000 Syrian refugees that are camping outside of their border on the Syrian side. They're very close to the Turkish border, and we just can't take on more refugees. They're saying there are 9 camps on the other side of the border, and there's a lot of people there. And it would be nice, since we already have the camps there, to make this a safe zone. where we can bring in military to protect these people because we have no more room in Turkey. See what they're trying to do at this point. Well, it looks like the U.S. is moving on to the next phase of the plan. Kerry, in an interview, delivered an unmistakable threat in connection with the U.S. negotiating strategy in Munich. He said, "What we're doing is testing Russian seriousness. And if they're not serious, then there has to be consideration of a plan B. You just can't sit there." Plan B. What is Plan B? Well, this would consist of a sharp escalation of the U.S. military intervention in Syria, carried out under the cover of combating the Islamic State, but directed at toppling the Assad government. Nothing's changed. This is what they've been doing all along. Saudi Arabia and Qatar have also reportedly spent the last several days discussing a Plan B that would involve their participation in direct military intervention to save the rebels that they have supported. So we see that Saudi Arabia has confirmed that the House of Saud is going to send troops into Syria. Of course, this is an invasion. And right now, in the United States, there is no support for any type of U.S. military intervention, so they're going to use other countries to do this. So the next phase is going to be the role of Turkey and Saudi Arabia. The Turkish forces are now directly involved in combat operations within Syrian territory. We saw this on a video from Russia where they showed Turkey is shelling the Syrian area. In turn, Saudi Arabia, which is a state sponsor of terrorism, has announced that they're going to send troops in, as we know. Saudi Arabia has said, "We will fight with the U.S.-led coalition allies to defeat the Islamic State militants in Syria." And what does this really mean? The proxy war against the Islamic State is over. They're removing the Islamic State from the area. A new proxy war with Turkey and Saudi Arabia with a ground operation is now unfolding, with U.S. NATO pulling the strings in the background. So what we're seeing right now is while they're talking peace and ceasefire, the United States, with the coalition forces, they have moved on to the next phase of the plan. They're going to do a full-out ground invasion. And under this evolving scenario, there is also danger that Turkey and Saudi Arabia forces, acting on behalf of U.S. and NATO, could be involved in military confrontations with both Russia and Iran. And what does this mean? Well, this opens the door towards a military escalation. Because at this point, when we look at what's going on here, we see that they're giving up the possibility and the idea of removing Assad. They know this is not possible. They know they're backed into a corner. The economy's crashing, as we can see. They have no way of getting Assad out of power and basically changing out the government in Syria, which means they can't get into Iran, which means they can't prop up the dollar. It's falling apart. They don't have the resources to go back into the other countries. They don't have the authorization for war to go back into the other countries. So now their new plan is all-out war. This is what they're doing at this point. And this should make every single person very, very nervous. This is why the draft bill is floating around Congress. This is why they're mentioning about drafting women. This is why you see all the U.S. armed forces commercials continually rolling and running. They're getting everyone prepared and ready. This is why we see the military assets, the ships, the troops, the training, the drills, all in these areas. They are getting prepared and ready. But the problem is, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UK, US, France, Italy, just can't waltz into Syria and say, we've got a ground invasion now. They need a way to explain why they need to go into Syria. Why they need to go in there. Why they need the ground forces. And we're starting to hear all these fear-mongering ideas from our government that the Islamic State, they've used chemical weapons, which we know. They have the capability to create chemical weapons, such as chlorine and mustard gas. They have the ability to create biological weapons, which they're working on now. And they're saying there's a strong possibility that they might hit the West for financial gain, which makes absolutely no sense at this point. Because as we know, the Islamic State is a proxy army for the United States government. They would never attack the United States unless the U.S. gives it the okay, which they're not going to do, because they need to control the next false flag. And whatever event they choose, it has to be big to explain away why they need to go into Syria. Now, it just can't be a shootout. It has to be something even bigger than that. It might even happen throughout Europe and the United States at once. To say, we need to go in there once and for all with ground troops to eliminate the Islamic State. And you know this is not going to be against the Islamic State. It's a way of getting the ground troops into Syria. And this will kick off World War III. Hopefully Putin has some type of plan to stop this, because I don't want a war. I know you guys don't want a war. We don't want to send our children, our cousins, our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our fathers to war. Nobody wants this. This is why there's no traction on the couple of bills that are in Congress right now to send troops and to give the power to the president, because nobody wants war. But again, our government, they will create something to put fear into everyone to make you do something you would never normally do, and that is go to war. And this is what they're working on right now. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.